this is the environmental aspect of this conversation, corporate sustainability 2025 in view, and we have with us Israel Ekpo. Israel, does the world really have a fever?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on this summit. Does the world have a fever? Yes, I believe the world have a fever, and I'm going to explain this by speaking about what actually led to the name "The World Has a Fever" and the 100-day climate change awareness campaign. So I think it was earlier in the year, I was watching a United Nations documentary on YouTube where they were just speaking about climate change. And then one of the stories they covered was in a city, in a village rather, in Switzerland, Bondo. That's the name of the village. So there was a landslide that happened in that village that took down 3 million cubic meters of rocks that were in a mountainous area. So these rocks actually crashed and covered the valley, and part of the village was uninhabitable because of that. And while people left that village, while people moved out from that area because they couldn't stay, there was a signpost written there, and it's Italian, La Montagna ha la febbre, and it means the mountain has a fever. I finished with that video. I kept on reading, I kept on studying, and the kind of things I was seeing, and it just gave me this meaning that it's not just that mountain there that has a fever, it's actually the whole world that has a fever. Because earlier in the year, the federal government of Nigeria mentioned that flooding is being expected in 31 out of the 36 states of the federation. You can't tell me that we don't have a fever here in Africa as well. And very sorry, Mr. Iheanacho mentioned it earlier, that we shouldn't exactly be bothered about that because we are not part of those that are part of the big emitting states. But I still feel it's not something we should sweep under the carpet. And even the international community, they are making room for us with the full understanding that we are not part of the big emitters, but then there should still be climate action coming from Africa. So they are making room for climate funds in a way for us. So I don't think it's a topic we should overlook as Africans.
Well,
thank you.
I can feel your passion. I can feel it from here. It's so palpable. I mean, this is a very controversial aspect of ESG because I've heard lots of comments, some snipe comments, some like what you don't even know what you're saying kind of comments, and people just feel like, hey, when it comes, I heard somebody literally say, they've been emitting. It's now time for us to emit. You're not telling us not to emit. No, we will emit. When we emit, we'll also go and look for carbon credits and buy, which is very funny. But I mean, that just gets to show we're Africans. This is home. My very first question says that someone says, God created the earth. When we were young, we were taught photosynthesis and how the earth purifies itself. What then is this whole climate change thing? Israel.
Please, before I answer this question, I want to explain what greenhouse gases are, right? Okay, greenhouse gases are also referred to as heat-trapping gases. It includes carbon dioxide and methane. So what they do is they prevent heat from escaping out of the Earth's atmosphere, right? So with these gases in the atmosphere, heat will not leave the atmosphere, concentrating this heat in the atmosphere. Now, over time, this is definitely going to make the climate, this is definitely going to make the planet warmer, right? And if you're looking at this from the perspective of, let me use an instance, you're cooking in your kitchen, and the windows are covered by a blanket, the door is covered by a blanket, and the heat that's coming from whatever you're cooking with is not leaving the room. With time, it's definitely going to get very, very, very hot. And it's going to get to a point whereby that kitchen will be uninhabitable for you. So yes, the earth purifies itself through photosynthesis rather, and plants use their leaves through their stomata. They're taking carbon dioxide, which cleanses the atmosphere, and then they give out oxygen as a byproduct and all that. But the issue is we are producing this carbon dioxide at a rate that is too much for the earth to self-cleanse.
Am I breathing out too much?
No. Imagine in the kitchen scenario I gave,
Yes.
it's still very hot, and then you bring a very small standing fan to supply cold, yeah, in that room. That small standing fan is going to do very little, especially when the heat continues coming. At a point, you will not be able to feel the impact of that standing fan. So that's exactly the problem. Photosynthesis, while it can cleanse the atmosphere, it cannot cope with the level of emissions that's going on, and that's the problem.
Thank you so much for simplifying it. I don't think I've heard anyone explain climate, global warming like that to me. It's very simplified.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, again, this is statistical climate change. How do you make an African man? Of course, you just did simplify it, but there's a mindset that we have. Because when we were talking, permit me to represent the African man. I'm wondering that this same planet have operated. How can you tell me that carbon dioxide is too much? That's actually I'm repeating so much. Like so that kind of thing. How do you change mindset of somebody who has that kind of mindset?
Okay, first of all, people change their mindsets when they have actually made it up to change. I'm not the Holy Spirit, so it's very hard for me to change the mindset of people. But I think it's about exposure to the knowledge surrounding climate change. If you don't study about it, if you don't read about it, if you don't see the scientific explanations behind it, it's not going to make sense to you. Because how will you tell someone that because I used generator and it emitted carbon dioxide, that there's going to be flooding in Delta State? It doesn't make sense to anybody, but you realize that they're actually very proven explanations to all these things. So you hear something like, if you have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's going to cause us to have too much heat. And if you have too much heat, heat leads to what is known as thermal expansion, and that is where water bodies automatically expand. They become wider. So what that means is, with too much heat, we are going to have the sea rising, and from there it leads to flooding. So if you try to explain this to someone, and it might not really make sense, except the person actually does this research or is actually exposed to this body of knowledge. So I think it's mainly about creating that awareness, and that's what we tried to do with our 100-day climate change awareness campaign.
Thank you so much.
We're entrepreneurs in our house. We're business people. We're professionals. Just want to know what actions been taken in our office because we are not putting the dark around that.
And also, what action do you think companies are taking that's contributed to this particular global warming?
Okay, one of the things that companies do that contributes is when they use fossil fuel in producing energy, particularly. And I know a lot of people would say, are you picking on fossil fuel? I'm not. I'm trying to answer the question. If you use fossil fuel and you are using your generators, and from the diesel, the end product is carbon dioxide, the byproduct, and this is going to have an impact on the climate. Another thing that companies do that is very harmful is how they dispose waste. For instance, gas flaring. For instance, oil companies, if their pipelines are actually being punctured and oil spills into the atmosphere. So these ways of disposing of waste is actually very, very crucial, and it contributes to climate change. There's an issue of using should I say utensils for lack of a better word. What I mean is, if you are trying to have all these disposables, so as a company, you deal mainly on plastics, but these plastics do not self-degenerate. More like you cannot degenerate them biologically. You need to burn them. And in burning them, you're putting CO2 back in the atmosphere. So these things, if companies continue with these practices, it's definitely going to continue to lead to more CO2 emissions, and it's going to worsen the issue of climate change.
Okay, great. So to also add to that, I know that use of a paper. So because somebody once explained the concept of a paper to me, because you have to do if you want one paper or how many sheets of paper, they have to fell a tree,
Yes.
then produce, and then the process of that tree is deforestation on the contribute, right? Carbon footprints, lights, and can you explain the concept of carbon footprint to us?
Carbon footprint simply looks at you watching the signs, so to say, that you are living on the earth as far as carbon is concerned. Imagine you are walking on a sea and you are leaving your footprint. Carbon footprint is simply saying, how are you producing carbon? Are you actually putting in more carbon in the atmosphere, or are you actually taking out more carbon from the atmosphere? And that is where net zero principle as far as carbon footprint is concerned comes in. So it's saying if you are producing carbon, try as much as you can to equally take out the carbon from the atmosphere. So you are using generator to power your offices and then you are producing carbon. Why not plant trees as well? So these trees can, using the process of photosynthesis, take out this carbon from the atmosphere. So putting it simply, watching your carbon footprint simply looks at how you can remove the carbon that you are putting into the atmosphere.
So we're talking about profits over planet, profit over people. I'm going to just give you a very brief story on the prior fuel trading company. Do you know about that? Yeah. So let me just give you a background on that. Yeah. Let me give us. It's a very interesting story. Now, 5 divers went to, and this is a live story. The case is actually still in court. 5 divers went to an oil maintenance area. Sorry, they went to carry out oil maintenance. Yeah, that's what they call it, right? Oil company people maintenance around the oil, around the pipeline, and there was something that they had done few weeks or few months back that they didn't know was taking in pressure. So that work that maintenance that they went to do, they took out a lead. Immediately they took out a lead, there was pressure from within the pipe and it sucked all 5 of them inside with their oxygen max on. So when they went down, like they hit to the end of the pipeline. I'm not sure how many centimeter or millimeter. I don't know how they count it now. I'm not sure how long it is, but it's very long from the explanation, right, of the story. So 5 of them were stuck there. After what seemed like 3 hours, what would seem to them like a lifetime, they woke up, all gained consciousness. Some of them had injuries, they checked and felt that they were all alive. But now they had been sucked up in I don't know, let me explain it so that people who are not going to be watching the video are going to understand. So the pipeline just had them one after the other. So they were all stuck up like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a straight line. The person in front was like, okay, I'm going to go out, right? And if we all try to go out, the oxygen we have on would not sustain us because we don't even know how far we are away from safety. But if I can take, and I think some of them had lost their oxygen max and stuff. And so he had said, if I can have what you have, right? So you pass it to me and I would go and call for help. Guys, this is a true story and it traumatizes me every time I have to tell it. I'll go and call for help. When I call for help, they'll come and rescue the remaining 4 of you. So the people that had their marks on gave it to him. So he wore it, had it back up, and he was going. On his way, very, very, very gruesome details. On his way, he found some oxygen of those whose oxygen marks had fallen off. He wore it and he was able to make it out. Thank God. When he got out, the first thing he did was he told them that all 4 of them are still alive and he passed out. And they took him to the hospital, right? Now, on getting to the hospital, of course, he had to be giving medical attention. I don't know how long it took for him to wake up again. But when he did wake up, he asked about the other 4. And they said they had not yet been rescued. And I think this was like the next day. So he now started trying to make trouble, like, help my brothers. They are all divers together. Help my brothers. And they're like, they are going to do that. I just need you to be stabilized. You know how all of these things are. So he stayed back and he said he kept on being troubled, right? He was troubled and he kept on, hitting on them, like, help these people. They are still alive. But while at the sea, they had analyzed that these 4 people cannot still be alive. And the only way to know would be to cut from his explanation where they are, to cut that side of the pipeline. But the company had considered that if they cut it, they are going to make a huge loss because of the fuel. Sorry, that's what they call it, right? Yes. The oil and everything that is there. So they decided not to make that rescue. So they allowed the 4 of them to die. And they said they kept on knocking there. And it looks like, from what one of them was saying, that he kept on hearing like faint noises. So it just showed that there was some form of life there. But they were considering that, okay, how many of them out of the 4 of them will even still be alive? And then if you cut, you're going to make a huge loss just to save people that may be dead anyway. So let them just die anyways. Now, that brings us to our question. The four of them died and... Sorry? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. So the four of them died, and he sued them. But that's it. What we're now saying is, if companies prioritize profits over people, this is one example. How then do you want to convince them to prioritize, the planet over profits?
Like I mentioned earlier, and like my brother spoke very eloquently about, this is, you can also say this is an ESG issue, right? I think before you're making of your company, it says something about who should be part of your board, and the fact that it shouldn't just be family members and all those stuff. You need to consider all this. Who am I bringing into the board? Because like you said, that was a board decision.
Yes.
The decision that we are not going to cut this, you can't pick this loss to save these people. That was actually sort of a sustainability decision coming from the ESG perspective. So I think it's very, very important that we try and get the right persons into the board. And while that was a matter that is going to go to pot, I think it's a matter that should really change our perspective as far as sustainability is concerned, as far as environmental policies is concerned, and as far as governance is concerned. So tackling that particular question specifically, I think the boardroom of each company should try and inculcate this. And I also think, coming from a legal perspective, there should be regulations in place. And it's a bit sad that we are actually lagging behind. Nigeria, Africa, generally, we are lagging behind as far as implementing all these regulations is concerned. But I think regulations and coming up with the right board structure can take care of issues like this.
Wow, thank you so much. So then again, people are tired of theories. How do you think MSMEs, what do you think they can implement in their 2025 business strategy, or business decision that can aid the planet and the people as much as they make profits?
Okay, so I'm going to use a practical scenario of one thing that happened in my office. It was during the rainy season. It wasn't so hot outside. Previously, we were spending a whole lot because of heat in the office, having the ACs on. So when the rainy season came in, I just said, let me do something. In my particular workspace, I spoke to my colleagues. So we decided that we are not going to be turning on the AC since it's also hot outside. We are going to just open the windows up, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the month, we reduced our overhead cost for lights by 50%. Yes. So as a company, as much as you're trying to take care of the climate, you should also understand that you are doing yourself a favor. If you are going to bring in sustainability principles, you are also trying to cut down your cost, because sustainability is also looking at being very, very efficient with resources. So if you are living sustainably, if you are doing your business sustainably, you are actually cutting down cost on your own side. So companies should try and imbibe this cost efficiency aspect. I also think companies should try and post trainings for their employees. This thing I'm talking about, I'm not sure my boss knows, but it's because I'm exposed to this body of knowledge regarding climate change and sustainability. I was able to effect that. Now, imagine if all the employees around in my office, they imbibe this practice. Imagine if the next office imbibe this practice. Generally, you are going to see that we are going to see more fruits, more results. At least these are not the big result, but you are going to realize that your overhead cost is going to drop. So it goes down to the issue of awareness. Companies should actually try and prioritize creating awareness within its members. There's also the issue of coming up with renewable energy. Although I understand that the cost of coming up with renewable energy at the initial stage is going to be very,
Very hard.
expensive. Yes,
Yeah.
very high. But you'll agree with that in the long run, you are going to have the fruits. And it also goes to sustainability, because if you notice, or if you understand that you're going to do this business for a long time, you'll be willing to do that in first rate. If you're not so certain of your business structure, if you're not so certain the business is going to last, you might think twice about it. So creating awareness is very, very important, and then embracing renewable energy.
My last question would be, by 2025, the government is trying to phase out single-use plastics without an alternative for us. What's your take on that, and what's your advice to entrepreneurs? Because we use single-use, we are using it everywhere.
There should always be alternatives before you try and phase out anything. that's why people are saying you can't just phase out fossil fuel like that. And personally, I preach for an energy mix, right? I think it should always be a gradual process. You can't tell people that have not set up the infrastructure for renewable energy to just abandon fossil fuel completely.
Yeah.
So I think it should be a gradual thing, starting with an energy mix. So you have fossil fuel and then you bring in renewable energy, gradually we'll get there. So taking away single-use plastics, I think it's something that should be gradual. What is the replacement? What replacements do we have in place for this? If we don't have that replacement in place, then let's just do it gradually. That's my take.
Wow. Thank you so much, Israel. Thank you for a very wonderful conversation. And that brings us to the end of this particular conversation. Thank you.